Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Telemarket 30, the webinar in which I'll take you through in less than 30 minutes into what's happening around the globe in our labor markets. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A and I will get to them at the end of the session. We have quite a full agenda for today. Of course, first of all, I'm going to go into what we see across the globe in the labor markets. I'm going to take you through an initiative by Revelio. We're going to go into the World Economic Forum that has published a Chief People Officer survey. We're going to go into our own Randstad research around Gen Z. We're also going to go into OpenAI and their jobs platform, and also the Economist has partnered up with Culture X to do research on culture in companies globally. So action-packed agenda for today. And like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A. First of all, the look at the labor markets. I think if I would qualify the current labor markets, it's like wait and see. What do I mean with that? Companies seem to be waiting and see what the impact is of the tariffs that the American government has launched globally, but also what the impact is of AI. And most companies are kind of sitting out, seeing what is going to happen to their demand, to the skills that they need in their companies. And there's a clear wait and see strategy. And you see that also in demand. So you can look at this graph. I've indexed the jobs postings for a couple of regions. So North America, you see that there has been a clear cooling over the summer. In Europe, it's also stable slash declining a little bit. And the one that really sticks out there is India, where the growth is really continuing and there's a strong increase in demand. And you might have heard some rumors in the last few months about a consultant recession. And when I saw this graph coming out like this, that reminded me of that rumor. Because if you look at the largest consultancy firms globally, you see that they're not necessarily in a recession, that it really impacts our people. Because if you look at most of those, the top 10, they're still growing. Outside of McKinsey, they're still adding headcount. But what happens, they're not declining in headcount because of AI, but they're actually moving a lot of work to India. So for those firms, almost all of them, you see that they're hiring significantly in India and reducing their staff in higher cost locations such as North America and especially also the Nordics. Also, an area where you see that there is some rumbles on the labor market is in the oil and gas industry. The oil price has been decreasing. OPEC has announced that they will increase production over the next 12 months again. And that, of course, has an effect on the oil and gas industry. And there were some major announcements of layoffs in that sector. At last, I wanted to go into the situation in the US, because you might have seen the news that job growth has been revised down and also was the lowest since the COVID pandemic. In the last month, only 22,000 new jobs were created or increased the economy with, and even there was a revision in the US for the June numbers with a decline of 13,000 jobs in the US. And if you zoom a little bit further into that, you see that the majority of the growth in jobs is coming from healthcare, and the impact of tariffs in a good way is not visible in the US yet. Blue-collar work is actually declining. That means that manufacturing is not increasing as of yet. And the big story, of course, there was the previous job report that came out also quite negative and led to potentially the firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner. And of course, that means that there was an extra attention to this jobs report. But also what I think is interesting to see is that going on to our next topic, a company like Revelio has now launched a public data lab. So what does that mean? They have announced that after there were some concerns by quite some people about the firing of that BLS commissioner, that they couldn't trust the data coming out anymore. So what have they done? They are a global workforce intelligence company, and they have a lot of data accessible to them, of course. And they have said, well, we're going to launch a public data lab that is free to use, that is based on more than 100 million worker profiles that they have in their data, and they're going to release that data one day before the BLS publishes the JOLTS report. So that's quite interesting. As you can see here in the graph, they predicted that in August there would be almost an addition of 50,000 new jobs extra in the US. The BLS came out a little bit lower, so that's maybe somewhat of a surprise. But I think the big takeaway here is that public companies are stepping into that gap that maybe governments are leading. And I think the main conclusion for me here is there has never been more data available when it comes to the labor market, to the workforce, the availability of skills. And that's a good realization, because I think the labor market is benefiting from as much transparency as possible. That means that the labor market can function a bit more fluid, that people see where the opportunities are, that companies are realizing where scarce talent might be hard to get, and there's the transparency, more transparency leads to a better functioning labor market. Moving on to the next topic is the Chief People Officer's outlook from the World Economic Forum. What have they done? They have looked at, or they have spoken to more than 130 Chief People Officers and to talk to them how they see the current labor market. And what comes across is that the Chief People Officers see a pretty stable demand in a way. There's the same amount of people almost that see an increase as a decline in demand for talent. But I think what was more interesting is their concerns. What are they worried about? And their top concern was that the employees would not adapt fast enough or upskill fast enough to keep up with the transformation in the labor market. And of course, they're thinking mostly about AI. And that also comes to their second and third fear, is that there might be potential career stagnation if people don't adopt AI fast enough. And they're even worried about that people will lose their skills because they're going to be over-reliant on AI. Another topic that I thought was very interesting that they flagged as one of their top concerns, and that was the concerns about ethics and data privacy. And I think that's one area that HR leaders really need to think about, is how will talent in their companies perceive the use of AI? Will they see it as an enabler, or will they also see it as a way to be monitored? And I think it's very important that especially leadership in HR starts thinking about how talent views that and incorporate those in those conversations. Because there's quite a bit of skepticism among talent on how AI will be used. The other big takeaway from this research is that the redesign of work is probably the most important element. Because of all the changes and the transformation of AI, not thinking about just implementing AI, but thinking about what that does to the workflows and how that means and how the job that people do will change is a core element. And that reflects well, if we move on to the next topic, when we get to a study from MIT. Because MIT researchers have looked at 300 implementations of generative AI solutions, not just external, but also internal build solutions within companies. And they found that 95% of those pilots are actually failing. And that, of course, is a bit of a shock to the system, that you think generative AI has this huge opportunity and would change it all. And then if 95% of those projects actually fail, I think that's a big wake-up call to think about, okay, what does that mean? Well, first of all, the MIT researchers found out that it was actually not the tech, but it was the human element to it that failed. So in the most of the implementations focused on sales and marketing, where they saw that the actually best implementation of generative AI solutions was probably in back offices. So first of all, the area where you do your pilots and the chance of success, of course, is a big area. Second, not bringing people along, not enough change management, just thinking that tech will solve it all. I think we all recognize these issues, but we see companies time and time again making these mistakes. And interestingly enough, with the promise of Gen AI, they still go on like this. And I think HR has the imperative to think about these things and make sure that people are being taken along the ride and included in how you actually implement that, what it means for your job, and that it's not just slapping on technology that then needs to change the job, but you need to think about, okay, how do the workflows realistically change? The other area that I think is very interesting is the rise of shadow AI. What is meant with that? What the researchers found is that in a lot of cases, the talent was not actually using the AI that was provided by them from the company, but they were actually using ChatGPT on the side or other AI solutions that were probably not vetted by the companies themselves. And I think this is human nature, right? If you know that a tool can do it, and you still have to do maybe laborer's work, and you can't use the AI solutions provided by your company, you start to look for going around the system. And again, HR has a role to play here to work with the IT departments and saying, no matter what you will implement and how you restrict that, our talent will find ways around that. And that's not always negative, but it is something that you want to manage, of course. And Randstad recently did a study on Gen AI, on Generation Z, and looked into how Generation Z is actually adopting these things. And what's interesting here is that there's a clear paradox for this generation. On one hand, they have the real confidence that they can learn the new skills. So 79% of them say that they can learn new skills quite quickly, also empowered by the use of AI, of course. But at the same hand, they are a little bit worried about what this means for their job, but also how they can use these skills in companies. They don't feel that they can reach all their ambitions within those companies. And you see that in different ways. You see that they're more interested in having a side hustle. And that's not only focused on actually earning money, but it's also about being able to develop new skills, venture out. It is quite an ambitious generation. And I think companies need to think about how you bring that into your company, because that ambition needs to be fostered. And that self-doubt is actually a reason for a lot of people in this generation to leave a company. So how do you actually make sure that you design your early careers program that it also helps build confidence of this generation to be successful in your workforce? Because if you don't do that, we know that this generation is more likely to leave. Their tenure on average is just 1 year and 1 month. So it is really short. So if you really want to make sure that you attract this talent, but also make sure that you keep this talent, then you really have the mission to make sure that they're confident that actually you can grow into your company. Next up, we have probably the most interesting announcement on the global labor market of last week, maybe even longer, and that was that OpenAI has announced that they will introduce a job platform. What it really means is still a little bit unknown. This job platform will be launched mid-2026, so still some time to go. And the idea behind it is probably twofold. On one hand, they want to match AI savvy talent to businesses, and on the other hand, they want to do certification so that people can show through ChatGPT that they have certain skills, and that they can then go to companies and say, "Hey, how can we make sure that we get a job for you?" And my take on this is that the matching, we always see that is not the easiest to do. And generative AI is in theory not a matching engine. So it will be interesting to see if they can actually match talent with the companies. But on the other hand, I think the certification is very interesting. It's also in line with what I talked about, I think, back in May, what Microsoft has launched, where they also use all their generative AI to go through within a company environment what skills that company has available, and then also talent can say, "Hey, yeah, I recognize this skill. I want to have that on my company profile." So there's a similar thinking. And I think this is a huge opportunity. Probably it will take a few years, but it's a huge opportunity for both companies and talent to have a better understanding on what skills are real. Because right now, deducting the skills is relatively difficult, right? You need to look at a resume to see has somebody done a job before. Otherwise, you need to interview, and we know that the reality is that interviews are not always structured in a way that it actually services. And then assessments are always quite difficult as well to fully understand what somebody's skills are. So if generative AI becomes a solution to prove that you have certain skills, it could be a very interesting opportunity. In the media, this was also announced as OpenAI is going to compete with LinkedIn. I am a little bit skeptic about that. I think there's still an opportunity there. There are some banks that also their analysis say, well, the reality on the recruitment market is probably quite limited because it's a quite fragmented market. And second of all, usually these tools are more to the use of recruitment companies more than they are to replace them. But of course, we'll be keen to follow this announcement and see what's next for OpenAI in the job category. It's probably also a response to how potentially disruptive generative AI can be to jobs, and also that commitment to the US government to certify more than 10 million people on AI skills before 2030. Moving on to the next slide, and this is the last topic for today. This was research done by Culture X, partnering with The Economist, and they looked at 900 companies on Glassdoor, and they not only looked at the ratings, but they also analyzed all the comments that people left on there. And they grouped that to certain cultural aspects, and they looked at what are the strongest correlation. And two interesting findings from that research. First of all, the strongest correlation between a healthy culture and a good company was leadership. So it really comes down to leadership being effective, being appreciated, that made a strong culture of a company. And I think that's another example which I already shared last time with the Gallup research, that leadership and leadership training is probably your best ROI that you can get. So if you improve your leadership, it has a big impact on the people in your organization. People don't leave the company, but they leave their manager. So for companies, there seems to be a clear business case to improve the leadership at the company. And I think this is an opportunity for HR leaders as well to start thinking about, okay, how does our leadership impact our company culture? Are we happy with that? And I'm happy. I see a question that it's hard to read those names that are up there. The ones that are scoring in the top right, maybe good to see, is Electronic Arts, EasyJet, Yahoo, NVIDIA. Those are the companies that are doing well on leadership and also on their overall cultural score. The other takeaway that I think is very interesting is that they say, well, you don't have to score high on all these areas. For example, they looked at SpaceX, and SpaceX scored relatively high, but they scored low on the work-life balance. So there are trade-offs that you can make as a company as long as that leadership is good and you make clear trade-offs, that there need to be areas that you really stand out, so that people can really see what that company is about and make a choice that they want to work there and that they appreciate the culture. All right, moving on to the next slide. That is our key takeaways. So a couple of key takeaways from this session today. I think there is more than ever good labor market data out there. The question, of course, is, do you know your way around? Do you know where to find certain insights that you like? I hope you appreciate this webinar and that's one of your sources. But this is, of course, more and more the data landscape gets scattered, and knowing your way around is going to help you to build those cases within your company as well, to see what's happening, to understand which talent is scarce, how you go to market in your recruitment strategies, for example. So that's an important factor. The next thing is the human side of an AI implementation. I am not surprised, but I am disappointed by how badly the generative AI implementations are going. 95% are actually failing, and that's because they forget the human side. Well, that shouldn't be a surprise, and I think companies over the next few years are going to make a difference if they actually know how to nail this and be good at incorporating their current talent into an AI transformation. Those are going to probably be the most successful companies over the next few years. And then on the early careers, confidence appears to be a very important driver for the new generation entering the workforce. So do you have a way to build that confidence when people join your workforce, that they can actually live up to their ambitions? Because if they don't, they will probably leave your organization. It is that clear. And last but not least, we see that OpenAI, of course, comes out with a interesting and exciting update mid next year. But what do you do now already to validate the skills? We see that talent uses more and more AI. It becomes harder to validate if people actually have those skills, because they all look good on paper, and the rise in deep fakes of joining virtual interviews is skyrocketing. So how do you actually validate skills right now? I think that's a couple of questions to walk away with after this session, hopefully. And if you have any questions on it, please do let me know. Then we'll move on to the Q&A. I see a question in the Q&A box. Many companies don't currently assess candidates' AI skills during the hiring process. Do you think this will evolve, not for IT or AI profiles? Yes, I think absolutely. This is going to be one of the crucial skills that it becomes kind of data literacy in a way. It's basically being able to use Microsoft Office from maybe 20 years ago. That it's important that you bring in talent in your workforce that understands the possibility of AI, but also understands the opportunities. And I think right now it is done within the interviews. There's no assessments that people do. Of course, in the interactions, I think the recruiters are savvy enough to figure out if people are using AI. But I expect that this is going to be a core step in the interview to say, hey, how AI literate are you? According to some research publications, less than 10% of large companies have an accurate, up-to-date skills inventory. How can execs shape a proper HR strategy without a core skills data? Is interested in this topic and what are they doing in this area? Yes, for sure. This is a main one that we see with a lot of companies, that they don't have a good skills ontology or taxonomy. And even if they have it, it's really hard to match your people to it. I think the biggest challenge always in this area is actually assessing, because most of the time those assessments are done by people themselves. And then actually, how good are you in a certain skill compared to somebody else? It's hard to do that in an accurate way. Now, as Randstad, we help companies with these challenges as well. We have our advisory team that works with people through these challenges. And we also do a lot of work redesign, where we take companies and look at the jobs that they have right now and reimagine them for the future to understand what skills, how the skills will evolve, what are the things that you might do with AI, but also what extra things you can then do and how can you reimagine that job. And I think this is an area that most companies are probably going to focus on in the next few years. So that's very interesting. Please share some ideas on how to determine what can be done by AI to help shape a realistic job description in today's world. So maybe the start here is not thinking that the thinking should be done by AI, but I think maybe you should start thinking about yourself on how a job can evolve. I always like to use the analogy of a waiter. If a waiter walks into, if you're going to go out for dinner and a waiter welcomes you and is going to be replaced by AI, and the AI is going to give you the menu and AI is going to help you pay. Everything can be done by a waiter from a person, by AI, but is that the experience that you want when you go to a restaurant? And I think thinking about what are the true goals of a job, what you're trying to do, is probably the good first step. And to think about what the job should look like, and then you can use AI to properly shape that. Many companies are resetting with layoffs to prepare for skill shifts and are all implementing AI FOMO. Interestingly, it seems like not too many are focusing on strategic workforce planning to meet the future and are stuck in operational workforce planning. Yeah, completely can echo what you're saying. I think most of the skills shifts, it is still limited, and as soon as layoffs are announced, it's always easier to say we're implementing AI and therefore we can lay off people than actually probably saying the truth, where the reality is that your business is not doing that well and you actually need to restructure for financial reasons. I agree, we definitely recognize that strategic workforce planning is a challenge for most companies. Also because of the previous topic that we just talked about with having the skills taxonomies and knowing which skills you have indoors and what you probably need to plan for in the future. So yeah, this is an area that we recognize quite, as well, and it's also where our advisory team is working with companies around the globe to see and how they can organize themselves around that topic. I think I have addressed most of the questions now. So that means that we are getting to an end of this session. I hope you enjoyed it, the session, and we'll be back in 2 months again for your next update within half an hour. Thank you very much and see you next time.